Thank you all again for joining us for what has come to be known as Chamber Chat, sponsored by the Greater Lawrence Chamber of Commerce. We're going to try to do this every Wednesday as long as most people are homebound, and who knows, it might even continue on after people get to go back to work. There seems to be a pretty good response to this. It seems to be a good way to communicate with some of the leaders in our community. So this week, we are honored to have from Indiana's 30th Senate District, Senator John Ruckelshaus. He represents a lot of Washington Township and the western side of Lawrence Township. And then you get down into like deep Broad Ripple, I think, also. So he's been a lot of places, and he actually helped one of our members earlier this week with a little issue they were having. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Senator John Ruckelshaus. John, go ahead and speak, and then when you're done speaking, we'll take some questions.
Outstanding. Hey, Brad, thank you very much for the opportunity to join everyone today. And I'll kind of give everybody sort of a high level of where we are and how things are going. And been on a lot of calls lately. And the theme, it's very interesting. Really, in the last week, the theme has shifted from what I call triage being, okay, we've got this virus. We know it's bad. We know it's very deadly. We know we have to ramp up our healthcare system. We have to ramp up our supplies. We have to ramp up aid to small businesses. We're going to have a shutdown. What's that? A shutdown meaning everyone stay at home, businesses close. I mean, this is just unprecedented, at least in modern times. We haven't experienced this literally for over 100 years. 1918 was the last pandemic that we went through in the United States and frankly, world. So the discussions have been really leading up to that. It's been focused on that, right? It's focused on making sure that we have all the proper healthcare equipment. Like I said, making nursing homes, triage, testing, a lot of questions, calls about testing. But now, again, the calls have segued, and the discussion is now segueing over, how do we open back up? So the job, if we pull back and kind of think about everything from a 30,000 foot level, was to, quote, flatten the curve, unquote. Well, what does that mean? That means that we try to get ahead or at least stay pace with the spread of this disease so that we would not overrun our healthcare facilities, our hospitals, and our clinics. So that's everything we've done thus far. So now that we have done that, and we now find ourselves in a position that our hospitals and our clinics do have capacity. I'm going to knock on wood here that they don't have to use that capacity, but that they do have capacity should there be another run. We're now talking about, okay, how do we open up or reopen up the state? And Brad, I know back to your former world of bars and restaurants, and the entertainment industry was the first hit. They were sort of the first into this whole pandemic and the shutdown. So what does that look like? What does that look like for our state's manufacturing, large employers, small employers? What does that look like for small insurance agencies, large insurance agencies, or white collar? And more importantly, I think the state right now is trying to wrestle with this whole concept of executive order / mandates versus recommendations. And what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean by that is that Hoosiers and Americans, we're not ones that like mandates, right? We like to be self-sufficient. We like to call our own shots. We're a free society. Heavens, 200 years ago, we told the British what to do with their tea, remember? So this has not been an easy exercise for Hoosiers or Americans. So we're trying to find that right balance of recommendations versus strategic mandates, again, all to control and stop the spread of this deadly virus. So that's what we're doing right now. What does it look like to open up? So I think, Brad, I'm gonna pause there because I'd love to get input from your members because they're on the front lines. You know, what are they looking for, maybe from state government? What kind of guidance are they looking for from state government? What kind of measures might they be taking? I mean, we're hearing folks that are going to be taking measurements that, hey, I don't want employees back into my facility unless they have been sort of screened on the way in on a daily basis, meaning maybe take temperatures, wear masks, make sure that social distancing, until people are comfortable with this whole environment, and then I could see it sort of ratcheting down. So I'll kind of pause right there, Brad, maybe throw it back to the group.
All right. Well, what you mentioned is an interesting question on taking employees' temperature. Where does HIPAA come into that? And is that a recommendation, or can that be a mandate?
Very good question. I mean, we're in uncharted territory right now that basically there's so many waivers now to rule regulations that have been festering for years and years and years, which is actually going to be a really good policy discussion when this is all over with. Did we need all these rules and regulations? Are we functioning as a business and as a society with a lot less rules and regulations? So that's actually the subset. So I don't have an upfront answer to your question, but anything's possible right now.
All right, then we will open it up to those in attendance. Does anybody have any questions for the senator on any of this? And everybody should be unmuted. Ross, you always have questions. I'm going to be like the teacher. I'm going to call on the class.
Oh, wow.
Attic method. Here's another thing I'm going to throw out as people are kind of contemplating possible questions. Another public policy piece that we're all going to be thinking about, and the technology that's going to be available literally right around the corner to help combat this, is going to be tracking or tracing. And it's very interesting. So there's a consortium right now, a partnership between Google and Apple. And what they're doing is they're creating an app whereby you'll be able to, in your daily life, as you walk around, travel around, go into different places, and you run up against someone or you're next to someone within a certain amount of feet, this app will identify whether this person has the disease, had the disease, has the antibodies, that sort of thing. And, you know, there's always a little humor in everything. And one of my good friends said to me the other day, he says, my God, I just barely figured out a dating app. Now you're going to have me try to figure out a coronavirus app. So, which I thought was kind of humorous knowing him. But the point is, these are really, then there's privacy issues that go into that, right? And how comfortable are Hoosiers and Americans to have that technology? It seems to be very valuable on the front end. But again, these are things just to kind of think through.
All right. Questions from those in attendance for the senator?
This is Finley for I have a question.
Sure.
What is the relationship between the state and the local entities when it comes to schools? Does the state put out some guidance when, I'm assuming we're going to start in the fall, or is that mostly left up to local jurisdictions? Is it a combo? How does that work?
Excellent question. So glad you brought that up. I do, for anyone that wants to know, please go to my Senate Facebook page, at John Ruckelshaus, SD30. We have a weekly call every Thursday. So tomorrow morning at 11 a.m., we're going to do another call. Now, last week was fascinating. We had representatives of K through 12, or kindergarten through 12th grade. So in answer to your question, all of those are state. It starts at the state. So the state is the one, both the State Board of Education, the legislature, have set forth the policies by your elected officials, and then it's what's called promulgated through the State Board of Education, or they basically interpret the laws that are passed or the rules. They set their own rules, and they have parameters to do that. So everything starts at the state. Now, here's what was interesting on that call is that obviously K through 12 right now is in absence, right? They're not meeting. It's all e-learning. The summer school has already been decided that will be e-learning. But right now, and they're going to give themselves up to probably June 15th or so, plus or minus, is that the Commission for Higher, not Commission for Education, but the Secretary of Education, Jennifer McCormick, and her team, in consultation with the governor, is going to then make the decisions about how schools open back up. Are they still on e-learning? Again, we don't know, because what's the containment situation of the virus? The goal is to open up in the fall for sure. But what's that going to look like? Again, are you going to have point of entry that the students may have to have their temperatures taken? Will they have to wear masks? Will classroom sizes have to be less? Might there be more e-learning versus in-class learning, et cetera? So all those are contingency plans right now. But to answer your question, it's the state down to the local. Then the local school boards still have a lot of decisions about the money, especially the funding that comes from the state, how to pay their, how much to pay their teachers, how much to pay superintendents, bus drivers, custodians, cafeteria workers, that sort of thing. Hopefully that helps.
Just kind of a follow-up, we were just speculating, is that there may need to be more money from education, because if you have to have smaller class size just for the social distancing, and if you have to put more emphasis on e-learning, those are probably expenses that were not necessarily planned for.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's no question about that. Exactly right. So don't know. Now, we have already budgeted for next year. So in other words, right now the legislature created a budget. It's a 2-year budget look ahead. Who would have known this was coming, right? When we put this budget together in 2019. So we are going into budget session next year, which obviously we're going to have those decisions or those things thought about. Now, the CARES Act, which came out of Congress, did allocate, this is interesting, the CARES Act, which came out of Washington, that was passed about a month ago, I think right now, allocated about $215 million to the state of Indiana to help in the pandemic for schools, specifically for schools. So Washington Township, for example, is receiving $2.5 million. Lawrence Township, Brad, you should raise your arms. You're north of $3 million that the township will receive monies to help. So there's some money there coming from the CARES Act, but that's one-time money, right? How long is that? That will last for about a year. And there's an additional $64 million in what's called Governor's Discretionary Fund. So the governor will have a discretionary amount of $64 million that he could use for hard-pressed areas, hard-pressed schools. And again, that's just K through 12. Those numbers I gave are just K through 12 education.
Now, Senator, I have a question.
Sure.
You envision a scenario where the governor might call a special session.
You know, there's a little bit of discussion going on behind the scenes. In answer to your question, I don't think so. I think if there is going to be, quote, a special session or any meaningful policy that's going to be discussed, I would look for that to be on Organizational Day, which will be November, usually 20th, right before Thanksgiving. The reason why I bring that up is the governor already has a lot of executive powers right now to do whatever he needs to do during this emergency period. The funding, and this is why Indiana, we kept a $2.3 billion surplus for times just like this. And with the CARES Act, basically backfilling some of these costs, we think we spent over $1 billion right now to date in the state in purchasing PPE and a lot of other equipment for the hospitals and all the immediate healthcare issues. So money is, when I say money's no object, it always is, right? But the point is, I think we're in decent shape in that. So you really don't, Brad, answer your question, you don't want to go into a special session unless you have a defined, specific goal to go into special session. And right now, with the governor having the tools that he needs short term, I think we're in pretty good shape.
Cool, thank you.
Senator,
Sure. Yes.
Senator, my name is Cassandra. I have a question for you. Do you envision when we do get to return to work that will be a county by county decision, or is Indiana going to have to kind of live and die by the same rules across the entire state?
You know, that is probably, I don't want to fix a dollar figure too, but that's probably one of the biggest policy questions going on internally within the governor's team right now. Because there's an argument that could be easily made that you could start rolling out in certain spaces or certain counties quicker than you can in others, right? Because if you look at the map and the impact in the state of Indiana, which is not dissimilar than this impact around the United States, it's really centered around about 10 counties. You've got one county, which is hugging the Louisville metro area down south. And then you have the central Indiana market, if you will, Marion County, Hamilton County, and then you have Lake County. Allen County to a much lesser impact. But the rest of the state hasn't been impacted as bad as we have. Same thing can be argued with all the states. They have these counties surrounding the large metropolitan areas. So I think, honestly, again, that's a big policy discussion, but I think what you'll see is an easing of the executive orders starting at the beginning of May, very cautious, very calculating, probably more statewide intent, and lessening some of the mandates to recommendations. Hopefully that makes some sense.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Ross.
Go ahead, Judge.
Yeah,
Go
Ross,
ahead.
You're up.
Well, Senator, my name's Ross Snyder, and our firm is an engineering and land surveying company in the Fort. And we're a member of a group at the State House known as ACEC, or the Engineers.
Right.
And thank you back, I think it was back in 2017 when you restored at the state level the funding for roads and bridges back to where it needed to be. But I think there's some provisions in there that it could be directed to other areas if needed. So I didn't want to ask necessarily about our line of work, but do you see much, I was going to ask about the surplus, and I'm glad you mentioned that, but do you see any type of redirecting of funds from previous budgets or previous commitments that'll need to be made?
Good question. I think it's too early to tell right now. Again, in a couple weeks, I have Chris Johnston on, who is Director of Office of Management and Budget, and we're going to talk about this coronavirus impact on the state budget. Segueing, though, this might be some interesting, it's not news, but something I've been thinking about. I'd love to get your input on this, Ross, is that, you know, it's an interesting paradigm in that for the last, 3 or 4 years or 10 years, really, all we've worked about or thought about is workforce issues, but that's been centered around an unemployment rate that's about 3 to 4% plus or minus. And now that we've shot up to near 20%, and in a lot of calls I've been on, economists are saying it's going to take a good 12 to 18 months to work our way out of this. So conceivably, we're the unemployment rate in the 7, 8, 9, 10% rate, which could go up or down a little bit. So my point in all this is, Ross, what about, should we not be thinking about some infrastructure projects that here in the state of Indiana that we may have put on the shelf that for jobs programs? We need to be thinking about jobs, creating jobs, right? Because we're going to have some folks that are somewhat displaced. And one of the things I've kind of thought in the back of my mind, like playing a seed with you, remember the Commerce Connector? Remember that idea? Is that something we should get off the shelf and dust it off and be thinking of something like that?
We'd love to have
the end of the Commerce Connector.
Oh, really? Sweet.
Do you want me to? I hear some screaming. I don't know if that's good or bad.
Oh, sweet.
Let me go to the gallery view and see who we've got.
That explains why it took a little while.
Yeah.
I said that explains why it took a little while.
So, Ross, did you have a follow-up question?
No, I just think those would be great topics to explore. Don't need to bog down the whole group with it. How about, Senator, if I have Beth Bauer, our exec at ACEC, reach out to you as far as infrastructure ideas? Absolutely.
And Ross, while I got you, here's something else to think about too, is that a lot of really good programs that government can come up with, there's always the old unintended consequences. And even though it's a short-lived program, the unemployment insurance system, for those Hoosiers that have lost their jobs, which is so sad, and through no fault of their own, they're also part of the CARES Act, or actually was one of the acts, CARES 2.0. There's 3 points to this thing. It included an additional $600 in unemployment insurance money to go on top of what Hoosiers are also receiving from the state of Indiana. So conceivably, when we come out of this in May and June, we might have some employees that, I'm doing better collecting unemployment than coming back to work, right? So that's something that we're going to have to keep our eye on as well. Again, this was all well intended, especially for those Hoosiers who lost their jobs and just a total shock to the system. I get it. And anytime we can help those folks in a short term just to get back on their feet, but we do want to get them back on their feet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions from the group? All right. I will ask one. Senator, you and I were working with a business owner earlier this week that had an issue. Obviously, with the PPP program, that didn't roll out. It rolled out all right, but not spectacular, and some of the money went probably where it shouldn't. But there were key industries that didn't get any help. And in this instance, this was a contractor for Family and Social Services. Do you anticipate that the state's going to get involved and help direct some of those funds at all?
Well, and thank you for bringing her up. Yeah, we're still working very diligently with her. We'll have some discussions with FSSA. I honestly don't know what tools that they have, kind of painting and using this individual as an example. So she's a small business person employing 6-7 people, which is the backbone of our economy, right? I used to be in businesses like that, own several businesses like that. And here she is, again, through no fault of her own. She's plugging along, she's growing, and boom, this whole thing happens. It was a good government program that came on the PPP on the first round, but she got in line like everybody else early, and there wasn't enough money. So it's a cash flow. At the end of the day, it's a cash flow issue, right, Brad?
It is a cash flow issue.
Yeah. Cash is king. If you're in business, cash is king, and cash flow in particular is king. So we're going to sit down with FSSA and try to see what we can work out with them, what options there might be, because she is a prime vendor for them. And I'm sure she's not alone. So I don't know. It's premature. But with this new round that came out of Congress, I was on a call. So some of your members, I'm kind of singing this from the mountaintop, is that I was on a call yesterday, and they're telling us to tell small business owners for this second round is right now, get with your banker, make sure that your I's are dotted, your T's are crossed. The application is ready to just press enter as soon as the first day, because it hasn't passed Congress yet. It's supposed to pass the House tomorrow, I think, and the president by Friday or over the weekend, because they're telling us that these funds, the second round, could go within 3 days.
Wow.
So be ready to go. It's a track meet. It's literally a 25-yard dash.
Now, do you envision that there might be some stipulations from the feds to banks on how they prioritize? Because it sure sounds like the bigger banks prioritize bigger clients on that first round.
Yeah, good question. I was on a Senate call yesterday with the Bank Association. We're asking this question, and they said no. It's simply a function of who. Again, literally, they were explaining to us that they were granting as many loan applications in a matter of hours that they do in a matter of years. So I get that, because you have a lot of people that literally would never have thought about this program, right? But it really was such a good deal. So I think Congress, as I understand it, and Senator Marco Rubio was sort of leading this cause or championing this cause, is that he made a lot of stipulations in there. Yes, Brad, to answer your question, that the larger companies would be excluded, and there would be billions. I can't remember off the top of my head how many billions would be set aside specifically for customers or constituents like the one you brought me, 7, 8, 10, 12 employees, small business, et cetera. And there's also some money set aside for WBE and MBE businesses as well. a decent chunk of that. So they kind of broke it down a little further instead of a total free-for-all, first come, first serve.
All right. More questions in the last 5 minutes or so that we have with the senator. Open format. All right. Well, I will ask another one that's not so business related. What is your favorite Lawrence Township restaurant?
You know, Brad, I was braced. I thought you were going to hit me with a marijuana question. I was all ready for that.
I told you several times, it's not my thing.
I know my favorite. I know. My favorite. Sorry about that. My favorite, obviously, is George's Neighborhood Grill. Still love George's, and communicate with him quite a bit. He's such a good man, such a great entrepreneur, hard worker. Son is. I was out in Washington 2 summers ago, and just calling on some folks, and his son was then Joe Donnelly in his office, and he's now in law school, I think, down in the University of Miami. So yeah, George's Neighborhood Grill.
Very nice. So any last questions for those assembled? From those assembled? All right. Well, if not, Senator, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. It has been a pleasure to have you here. Any parting thoughts?
No, the only parting thought is it's been an honor. And listen, we're here to help. Even though if I may or may not represent the area from where you are or where your business is, I'm still a state senator, and that's the way we approach it. So my email address is s30@iga.in.gov. Brad brought this constituent to our knowledge, and we're happy to help. So please, we're here to help you.
Thank you very much. Well, actually, 1 minute here. Let's see. It says we're about to run out of time, so
Sure.
it's going to end in 10 minutes. No worries. So anyhow, Senator, thank you again for joining us. For those of you who are assembled, keep in mind our next events will be tomorrow evening, 5 p.m. We're going to do a Greater Lawrence Chamber Happy Hour. That event is on Facebook, and it should also have been in your email. That's drink whatever you've got. Just come join us, and we'll spend 40, 45 minutes just kind of hanging out and chatting about business and what's going on in the world. And then next Wednesday, we will have State Representative John Bartlett. He has the southern half of Lawrence Township in his district. He will join us and talk more about the legislature and what's going on from his point of view. So I want to thank everybody for joining us once again this week. And hopefully we'll see you tomorrow night.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Senator.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Senator.
you,
Thanks, Claude.
Brad. Thank you.